Yes. There was just a LinkedIn post that because as I've grown in focusing on this space, I have gotten more connected with men around the world and some women who are really passionate about men's issues. And there was a post by a gentleman the other day. I'll have to get the name to you so people can check out his work because it's not coming to me top of mind. But the article was about if we really want to know how men are feeling, we need to stop judging them basically for when they tell us, right? So it was basically stop
Mm,
asking men what they're feeling when you reject what they tell you.
interesting.
And I think there's a tendency to want men to show up to your point as we show up as women. And one thing I'm aware of and learning is that it's the way men build connection, the way men build community, the way men craft their own ways to feel and to talk about their emotional landscape looks and feels quite different than the way I do it. And so, like, better understanding that language and creating more spaciousness for that language is important.
Hello, my extraordinary women friends. We are changing things up today, diving into a conversation that looks at our role as women in a different way. Specifically, how we can play a pivotal role in fostering healthy masculinity in both the workplace and at home. It's a topic that's becoming increasingly important in today's world, and who better to explore it with than my dear friend Mo Carrick. Mo is a multi-time TEDx speaker, multi-time best-selling author, and a pioneer in workplace culture. With over 20 years of experience working with top global brands like Nike, Amazon, and Reddit, Mo has built award-winning frameworks that help workplaces become more inclusive, connected, and human-centered. In this episode, Mo shares her powerful insights on emotional intelligence, the connection advantage, and what's happening with men right now as an identity group. As a mom, as a wife, this is something I think we all should really be thinking about. We'll explore how women can show up as leaders in creating workplaces where everyone thrives and why emotional intelligence plays out differently for men and women. Mo's guiding belief that when we thrive at work, everybody wins couldn't be more relevant. And I'm so excited for you to hear her wisdom on how we can build healthier, more connected workplaces. Let's meet Mo Carrick. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Mo. I am so happy to have you here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was just thinking as we were prepping to go, what an honor it is to be on a podcast called Extraordinary Woman. It makes me
And
feel
you are
bigger.
one for
It's
sure. You are
makes me
definitely
feel
an
bigger in
extraordinary
my
woman.
pitches. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's been so fun getting to know you over the past several years, and your work, it's so inspiring. What you've built, your company is really inspiring. Well, you tell us a bit. I mean, I think you've been doing this for about 20 years, or maybe even over 20 years, of really helping companies transform their workspaces. And you've built an impressive list of clients like Nike and Reddit and Amazon. Share a little bit about this journey of, what took you into building this business and, just what that journey's been like to get to this place.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, at my age, it's a journey, right? Like you look back and you go, wow, it always feels to me like my career has been a little bit like that game show where you have like door number one, door number two, door number three, and you go through door number one and then you are like, oh, look, there's all these more doors,
Right.
behind. So it feels simultaneously like an accidental career, but also like
Mhm.
a career that's had a really natural progression. So I have had momentum now going into my 23rd year.
Wow.
But I was in similar work prior to that. So I worked as an internal consultant in a big company and also for another consulting company. So I sort of transitioned from there into owning my own business 23 years ago. And prior to that work as an internal consultant, I worked as a wilderness guide and a
Oh,
therapist in
wow. Oh, I didn't know
wilderness-based
that.
therapy. Yeah, I worked for Outward Bound and the National Outdoor Leadership School and a company called Project Adventure, which back in the 80s was really leading the way around the use of adventure as a catalyst for corporate programs, which is kind of answers in part your question. It's how I first started to think about, gosh, this work, and by this work, I think for me, it meant back then the work of group facilitation, the work
Mhm.
of meaning making in a peer cohort setting is available not only in a therapeutic context for youth at risk or families that are struggling. It can also be used as a organizational context to help leaders be more effective, to help teams
Absolutely.
build partnerships. So after I got my master's degree, which is in organizational development, was I when I kind of made the shift and hung up my polypropylene and backpacks and went into the corporate world and cut my
It's
chops
real
with
funny.
incredible.
I've got a client, Renelle Everett Dar, and she's a consultant in space like you are. And she's actually putting together leadership trips to Nepal right now. So it kind of fits into the whole theme of that, right? Um,
Yes,
yes, because
totally.
it is good for executives to get out of their normal spaces.
Totally, and I'm seeing a little bit of an uptick in re-interest in that. For a while, it was kinda like nobody was taking people outside of the walls of buildings, and it was kind of like it had become de rigueur, and now it's, like, kind of becoming, popular again, I think, as people are
That's
so hungry
cool.
for space.
As
Yeah.
somebody who's led leadership retreats with my horses, that's intriguing to me because I've done things with Lockheed Martin and big organizations like that. But it's actually dawned on me just recently. I was like, maybe I should do some more of that because I just love it. It's so much fun.
Totally. Oh my gosh, we would have a blast if we ever did a equine learning
I know
experience.
because you're a horsey person too.
Totally, and I've done EAL, with groups because it's horses are so emotionally intelligent, and it can teach us
Totally.
so much about leadership and
Yeah.
followership. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we'll
I
have to follow up on that conversation.
totally, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So back to your story.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, so I think what has been a common thread for me is two. I would say there's two common threads for me from the beginning. One is that I've grown and I have always been really intrigued in the notion of how do we find the work that we find and what does it mean to us. So I sometimes say, Cami, that I was born into the house of work. Like both my parents were very hard workers. They worked in different ways, but I worked at a very young age. We didn't have a lot of money. And so I had to work to go to college and, those kinds of things. And I liked working. I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
worked, from age 14 on. I never really stopped. And at the same time, I, like most of us, have had some miserable jobs, some jobs
Yep.
where I thought, God, the clock is just not going fast enough. How can I get out of this cubicle? And and I think those early dissatisfying jobs caused me to think a lot about why is work miserable sometimes? Why is
Right.
work joy filled and amazing sometimes? And what's the difference in those two conditions in terms of my performance and our performance together? So as I started working and consulting more with organizations and watching them figure out try to figure out how do we navigate turbulence? How do we deal with leadership transitions? How do we grow healthy company culture? I really became aware like, okay, there's a connection here between how we design and lead our companies and how we facilitate human thriving at work so that everybody wins.
Yeah.
And that's been really the work of the last 20 years,
Yeah,
writing.
and that's you've had a TED Talk or TEDx
Mhm.
talk, and you've written a book. What's the name of your book?
Yes, I actually have three TED Talks and three
Three
books. I'm like the house of
three TED
three.
Talks and 3 books. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I know. I know. Well, my third TED Talk is not about work as much as it is about women's role in healthy masculinity. Because another
Yeah,
passion project that I have is emotional intelligence and how men are doing today, which is sort of a tangent. But most of my clients over the years, working so often in the C-suite, have been men. Although I love working with women leaders as well, but there's just a lot surfacing in that space. So yeah, I have three books. My most recent one is called When Work is Good. Prior to that, I wrote Brave Space Workplace, and my first book, which I wrote with my co-author Cami Dunaway, it was called Fit Matters, and they all focus very much on the same thing, either kind of from the employee lens in Fit Matters. How do we find the company that's right for us, and get that culture to help our growth. And then the other two, much more written for leaders in organizations to help them design and lead the kind of organization that brings out the best in people and also gets them the kick ass results they want.
that's so cool. It's a funny side note is I had dinner over the holidays with a friend of mine who runs a company called Culture Talk, and she knows Cami, and she knows you.
Yeah, I talked with
And
her.
okay, so you've talked with Cynthia, and she's like, "Oh my god, I am such a fan of Mo Carrick," and I don't even know how we got on the topic, but it was like over a holiday dinner. Here we were, and then she was just a huge fan of your work,
I
and she knew
love.
you through Cami. So
Well, she's actually someone I've been meaning to follow up with. Thank you for that reminder because she's doing really great work with
she is doing great work. She's
and
and she's been on the podcast here, so
awesome.
she's been here. But the culture talk work is really fun, and it's archetype type work that I got certified in several years ago. So it is really fun work. I love all these interconnections. It's
I
so beautiful.
know. I
So
know.
beautiful. Well, this is so cool. And so let's start. I know one of the things that you've been passionate about lately, and you've touched on this a little bit, is the positive masculinity, right? It's like, how do we really, what's happening for men that you are encountering in the workspace in today's environment?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I was thinking earlier as I was prepping for our conversation how paradoxical it feels in some ways
Mm-hmm.
to talk about issues facing men today as a lifelong feminist and advocate for women, um, which I am and I remain.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that women still have pay disparity and still
Right.
have challenges related to sexism and misogyny that impact how we grow and how we go at work. So all of that rings true for me.
Right.
And in recent years, I've begun to be more tuned in to what's happening at a meta level with men.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, it's been curious for me because women's liberation, my mother was a young feminist. She was a feminist in the 60s, and
Nice.
she was the one who told me I could have it all. Now, she never clued me in, like, not all this at the same time.
She forgot that part of the sentence.
She forgot that part of the sentence, but she was very, she was I would say, newly awoken by the rise of the
Mm-hmm.
feminist movement in the 1960s and 70s, um, and so that was sort of often my lens. But then I became a mother. I have two grown sons and a grown
Mm-hmm.
stepson. As I evolved my own work with momentum, and did notice that so many, unfortunately, disproportionately, the number of men that I work with in the C-suite are men. I
Mm-hmm.
began to notice some trends around with clients, what were they coming to me for? And with my family, the men in my family, noticing the challenges they were facing that were quite different than women. So, speaking on the client side first, I noticed oftentimes male clients were doing well in more traditional performance metrics in their work, but they were falling down in the realm of creating healthy cultures, building teams that
Mm.
can have high trust. And oftentimes, the work we were doing in coaching was a lot about their emotional intelligence, how to
Mhm.
be fluent in the realm of human connection and leveraging relationship as a key part of leadership. So
Yeah.
that was sort of happening in the professional
And
space.
is it
And then
because they weren't being taught that in a life, and as a life skill set?
they weren't. They still aren't really.
Yeah.
Jennifer Bowman, who's a gender studies researcher at the University of Florida, described it this way. She says men are given a much more narrow band of emotional expression than women are given from the time they're
Mhm.
little boys. So
Right.
on either side of that band is like a cliff, and the band
Interesting.
includes just a few emotions that are safe to express, like anger
Right.
and
Right.
frustration. Whereas women, as little girls, were given a much broader base of emotional expression, interestingly, with one exception, which is also anger. So
Oh,
women
interesting.
are
We can
not
do all the other places, but anger is not the space that we're supposed to do that in.
exactly. So we
Interesting.
subvert, right? We
Yeah.
subvert anger with tears. If you ever talk to somebody at work who cries and she's a
Yeah.
woman, you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're so sad." And she says, "I'm not sad. I'm
Yeah.
pissed."
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
like, "But you look sad." And so the same thing happens to men. Men are angry. We say, "Oh, you're angry," and then they say, "No, I'm not angry. I'm hurt, or I'm ashamed, or I'm scared." And so I would say that combined with that professional, like, nod that I've seen, I also have seen my own men, call them my own men, my husband,
Mhm.
my first husband, my grown sons really struggle with some things that feel so central to how I thrive as a woman, like
Mhm.
community,
Mhm.
friendship,
Right.
um, safety. I have one of my family members is recovering from the disease of addiction. Another one has suffered with severe depression. My husband has been through two serious cancers and had to figure out how he would allow himself to be helped in those times. And so, as someone who has loved men in those capacities, I began to see like, gosh, there's less support. There's less
I
receptivity to
see
mental
that.
health treatment. There's less places for men to go to talk about what they need. I also have felt as a woman sometimes overburdened with carrying the emotional water for
Support.
everybody.
Hmm.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. And so then of course now when I roll that forward to today, it's being talked about much more broadly. And men, the data is telling us, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the work that our current Surgeon General, although he won't be for long, Dr. Vivek Murthy has produced. One is his workplace report on mental health and well-being. He also produced a 2023 report on loneliness as an
Okay.
epidemic.
Okay.
One of his other seminal reports is around the harm that social media causes young people. But Dr. Murthy has really illuminated in his research some of the disproportionality around the impacts on men. We see the highest suicide rates in men today and boys.
Mm,
We see the highest substance abuse disorder rates. We're seeing both victims and perpetrators of gun violence disproportionately landing on men. We see retirement as a common point of depression and suicidal ideation. So men are not thriving
right.
globally.
Right.
And of course, some connect the rise in authoritarianism internationally as being connected to that, combined with social media, which is often preying on vulnerable men with offers of community that may not be real. When we look at young men being recruited for um, dark forces or
Oh,
you know,
right. They're finding an easy angle into to that the let us support you in this
that is
community.
support. Yeah,
I
because they're
see
not
that now that you
finding.
say that. Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Right. Well, I think there
Yeah.
was, yeah, several of the most, the big gun violent terrorist attacks that we've seen that have been, or not even terrorist attacks, just incidents of mass gun violence have been young men who have found places on the internet that recruited them to believe in something or be part of something that was really not good for them or
Mhm.
for the
Mhm.
world at large, but felt like perhaps a type of belonging. So that for me has just raised a lot of concern and a lot of interest in helping to create more fluency for men to thrive. And
Mhm.
I think we as women have a really important role in it, although it's not our work. Most of us, even if we're trans, gay, queer, most of us still have men in our lives that we love and partner with
Right.
in a
Right.
professional and personal context. So, like, where I always say, wherever we go together.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
yeah. So
No, I've
that's
definitely seen, I mean, even as you said, so I've got a son and I have a husband, that deep love around, and you see some of these different challenges that they face, even in the workplace. I can think of the challenges that my husband has come across in a workplace, and and so what do we do? I mean, how do we as women, because what women need and what women and men need are very different. Like, I mean, there are the disparities that women have, and there are the things that, I'm all about raising up women's voices, and I choose to, put my focus there. And at the same time, it's like, how do we support the men in our life, and men in community, as women in their lives?
yes. There was just a LinkedIn post that because as I've grown in focusing on this space, I have gotten more connected with men around the world and some women who are really passionate about men's issues. And there was a post by a gentleman the other day. I'll have to get the name to you so people can check out his work because it's not coming to me top of mind. But the article was about if we real if we really want to know how men are feeling, we need to stop judging them basically for when they tell us, right? So it was basically stop asking
Mm,
men what they're feeling when you reject what they tell you.
interesting.
And I think there's a tendency to want men to show up to your point as we show up
Mm-hmm.
as women. And one thing I'm aware of and learning is that it's the way men build connection, the way men build community, the way men craft their own ways to feel and to talk about their emotional landscape looks and feels quite different than the
Mm-hmm.
way I do it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, better understanding that language and creating more spaciousness for that language is important. And I think I would add, Cami, an additional layer that's specific, I think, for both you and I, which is that there's a unique niche here for white women.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
Um, Partly because white women are enculturated, I believe, and some of the research I've read talks about how we are enculturated so strongly to support men and also to garner power by our adjacency to men.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
that results in us having like some paradoxical affective and real things that we do for and with men. Let me give you an example because this all gets really heady, but I want to make it concrete. A friend of mine witnessed what I would call like a light sexist incident in her workplace.
Uh-huh.
What had happened was that there was a group meeting and a woman said something and no one heard her. No one reacted. And then a man, a powerful man in the room, one of the leaders, said the same thing and didn't credit her, made it sound like it was his idea, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And many people noticed it in the room and nobody said anything in the meeting. But after the meeting was over, the women who were in the meeting, and this is in the financial services sector, so most of the meeting was men. There were maybe 3 or 4 women there, and one of them had been the one whose idea had been kind of co opted. And so the women happened to be sitting in the room afterwards. And one of the other women, not the one who had the comment co opted, said, "Gosh, I was really sorry that happened, that so and so, shared your idea and took it as his own." And she said, "Well, I know, that's just what happens sometimes, but I take it for what it is." And this other woman said, "I think it might be good to give him that feedback. Like, I didn't want to do it publicly, but I wonder if you're interested in sharing with him the impact that had on you. And if not, I might share the impact that had on me because I noticed it." And the woman who had the idea co opted right away backed away from any offense being caused. And she covered for him. She said, "Oh, no, no, no. It didn't bother me. I'm not, I'm not offended. That's just whatever his name is, Mark. He was just trying to be funny, whatever." And the other women were watching her and going, "Why are you minimizing this now? Like
Right.
this, how is he ever going to know that he has this impact if we don't tell him?" So another woman did give him that feedback, and it ended up that Mark circled back and owned his behavior and apologized in a really healthy, productive way. But that woman's reaction of minimizing the impact
Right.
of sort of fawning over that leader around and sort of he was just being funny when she knew darn well that comment was effective. Those are some of the things we do that don't help men get more capacity
To
for.
grow and to expand. That's really an interesting story. It's a very interesting story, and it's not to call them out in a mean way, but this is how I felt in this moment.
Totally,
And
this is
to be brave enough to do it, right? Because it takes
yes.
courage to do that.
Yes, and I think she didn't. I can see why she didn't do it because she's sort of a favorite and she wanted to
Mhm.
garner his attention and she didn't want him to reject her,
Right.
And so there's a lot for us all to learn around how can we bring that kind of honest feedback to men without causing offense, without being just, playing the woman card or whatever. So I think that's one thing that we can do. I think another thing we can do is to be open hearted around our own emotional intelligence and how we partner with men as we jointly learn how to connect at work. So, what I hear often from women in the context of work is that they have hesitation to share their feelings
Mhm.
because they don't want to appear unprofessional.
Right.
There's been a lot of enculturation around
Oh,
really
yeah. I
business
remember
like.
a boss saying to me once, he said, I never have to worry about the men crying. Right? It's like that. It's like they don't even know what to do with that. And so yeah,
Yeah, which means that women end up, a lot of times I think of it as assimilation. Like I say it even about myself. I can do white guy really well. I can. I've learned the game, but that's not authentically me.
Right.
Now, I would prefer not to cry at work for sure, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do know that my emotions are a really helpful source of data for how I partner and how I lead my team.
Right.
And so I think that there's some work for us to do as women around, again, being braver with our own emotional intelligence, learning how to use emotion as a source of data without coming from emotionality.
Hmm.
And then also really creating safe spaces and places and, through support and challenge to help men tune in to their own ways of connecting and to even recognize that those are valid.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's another concrete example of that. So you probably remember, like I do, Cami, I guess it was maybe 15 years ago, I started noticing a lot of my clients really genuinely offering paternity leave
Hmm.
for men, which
Hmm.
didn't exist with ease when
No,
I was a
definitely,
young mother.
definitely didn't exist when my son was born.
No, I think the father of my children took maybe 1 day off,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then he was back to it.
Hmm.
But now many companies are offering equal paternity leave or parental leave to men and women, and yet the vast majority of men don't take it
Oh,
at work.
interesting.
And when I ask young men, what's your experience with that? And I think younger men are getting braver around taking it, but they have the same fear that women have had, which is like, I will be marginalized. I will lose
Mm,
traction in my career. And they say the same thing when they are a primary parent at home, or if they are a caregiver of an elderly parent and they have to leave work early. Men have the same, I think, in the men I've talked to, they have the same anxiety and fear about lack of career progression and looking unprofessional that women have had, but they don't have any track record of being able to talk about that.
oh, interesting. Right.
um, and
That
being
makes
able
sense.
to claim that.
Right.
And I think, especially as we look at how many women's income either meets or exceeds their men right now in the world of work, there's a lot of conversations I think that can happen around how does that connect to worthiness? Because like the old model of a working couple was typically that one income was higher, it was usually his and the other would be the spouse who stays home. And
Hmm.
that is not
That's not
real anymore.
necessarily the case anymore. No.
It's not, but the myth of that really impacts men in terms of their identity
Right.
around being a provider, even if they're not the provider. So
Hmm.
I talked to a guy a few weeks ago that I was coaching who had taken 2 years off to be with his young children. And then he was re entering the workforce. And he said, gosh, it's been horrible being at the playground as the only dad. But now it's horrible re entering the workforce when people want me to explain this 2 year gap.
Right.
And I'm like, until we see men as competent caregivers and validate their need to be primary in their families emotionally the way women are, we won't get equity or
Hmm.
equality at work
Hmm.
because we'll
Interesting.
continue to be the women who have to stay home, even if they're making more money.
Right. Right. That's really interesting. That's really
Right?
interesting. So what about like at home? And what are some of the things that we as a mother, as a spouse, might do to really help men in that space?
Whew. That gets all close to home, right? Because it's stuff
Hmm.
that I
Totally.
need
It's
to
like, I
do,
mean, I have
right?
to do something.
I know, I know. Well, I can tell you what I'm working on. Like
Yeah.
one thing that I've been working on a lot, and this isn't only true for my male grown children. I have a daughter as well who's also an adult, and they're all teaching me this, but is to do our own work around not carrying their emotional solutioning.
Because we want to always solve the problem.
We want to solve the problem, which is
Oh
of course
yeah,
a
I can
parental
see that.
dynamic as
Hmm.
well as a
And
feminine dynamic.
even as a spouse, I can see myself doing that. It's like this is what you should do.
Totally. Totally. So I think like just sitting in that space around being able to facilitate them um, doing the emotional work that they need to do and not jumping in to rescue them. For example, I had a
Interesting.
conversation with one of my grown children recently, and he was trying to tell me a story about something that impacted him, and he was slower to tell it, and he uses less words than me. So I kept inserting words. Oh, did you feel sad? Did you feel? And he finally was like, Like, "Mom, I'm trying to tell you what I'm feeling, but it's you keep prompting me, and it's about what I'm feeling,
Right.
not about what you're feeling." So
Interesting.
I think
I could
that's
see me
something we
doing
can
that
do.
too.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So
totally.
really just allow the space for
Allow the
that.
space. Another thing I'm working on a lot, my husband and I have been working on this, is to encourage male friendship.
Yeah.
Women, I feel like as a woman, my friends are so cherished to me. And
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of friends, but the ones I have are really dear. You're one of them.
Mhm.
And we have book clubs and we have entrepreneur groups and we have a lot of forums for men. We have motherhood groups and men have very, very little of that.
Yeah.
And what I've seen so often happen, especially in heterosexual relationships or marriages, is that the man's friend group becomes her friend group.
It's so true. Hmm.
And so, something my husband and I have been playing with, he joined after following the lead of my two sons. He decided to try a men's group.
Hmm.
And he now goes weekly to his men's group. And it's not a therapy group, it's a group of support, for men. And it's been lovely for me because as we talk about challenges, so my husband's in semi retirement, and that has brought up many feelings for him around his own notion of being a provider and all, retirement and getting old and all that stuff. And we talk a
Hmm.
lot about that, and I try to support him as he works through that. But there's a lot of that work that I think he is better served to do with other men who have been there, who understand the pressures of providing in a different way than I do. And I've seen him feel and act much more grounded. He seems to feel more supported. I feel less pressure to be his primary support
Hmm.
when hard things happen. And I've had to create some spaciousness in my mind to be less threatened by, him investing in male friendships. And I think that's something that we can do as
I think
women.
I like that too because it just gives them space to go deeper with whatever they're feeling in that practice of that, right? The practice of being
Yeah.
able to share what's going on in their world. And I do think that that's important. So I like that suggestion a lot. Let's talk a little bit about debunking outdated myths of what leadership looks like. I think that let's
My
like
favorite topic
wrap that
these days.
around, wrap into that a little bit.
Yeah. I think as I've dug into the topic in my books and in my practice, what I've noticed, I'm curious if you've noticed this too, and I don't think it's conscious, but I really have come to believe that many of our notions about what good leadership is are remnants of the Industrial Revolution.
Hmm. Hmm. Totally right.
Which
It's
was
such a different space today.
it was a long time ago.
Right.
It was a long
Right.
time ago that people moved from agrarian societies to cities, and we amassed people in one place, and we needed hierarchy to control the flow of input and output in factories. Those days, that was, in many cases, hundreds of years ago. So, what I see happening, and I think it's particularly resonant right now in the post COVID global pandemic environment that we're in, where we're seeing all this hybrid work, and is those notions of leadership, which are often unconscious, they show up and they drive certain behavior that is sort of seen as like what good looks like at work, but it isn't effective.
Right.
And so I think when we look at, and there's a lot of research that points to this, um, when we look at the attributes of leadership that is effective and required in the modern world, service based economy, global relationships, many cases, hybrid work in the professional sector, um, people entering new fields. We have more men entering more fields that used to be just women. We have women in all fields that used to be just men. I think that we know, like in our hearts, and we see in practice that the qualities of empathy, the qualities of good listening, the qualities of patience, of community building and shared
Things
vision
that
and
used to be called soft skills, right? Which I
feminine.
really don't like that word soft skills because there's nothing soft about it.
Exactly. Exactly. If you've ever tried them, you know just how hard they are,
Right.
and John Gazima and Michael D'Antonio did a really powerful study. It's featured in their book called the Athena Doctrine,
Mm-hmm.
and it was 100,000 person study. Which, for those of you that do research, like that's a big study. And they asked two questions. The one was, "What are the qualities that you think are required for leaders in the next 50 years?"
Mm-hmm.
And the second question was, "Of all these leadership characteristics, which one do you think of as masculine versus feminine?"
Interesting.
And guess what? All the leadership qualities that people saw globally that were going to be the ones that were necessary in the future were seen as feminine.
Interesting. Right.
And people sometimes hear me say that and they're like, so men have to become more like women? I'm like, no, men
We have
have to
to be
be
both, right?
they have to be both. And
Right.
what happens if men start embracing those parts of themselves that already exist that have been shut down and minimized to be more effective in these ways, which also means women have to develop new skills that maybe have been shut down and minimized in us to be more
Right.
effective.
Yeah.
But I think that command control environment is outdated. I think um, I think that authoritarian leadership is outdated. Um, I think we're seeing huge upsurge of the need for leaders who can bring out the best in the humans that work for and with them, which is
Mm-hmm.
very nuanced, very interpersonal, very much about engagement and connection, very emotional,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually started to every time I start talking about the masculine and the feminine, I almost always couch it with we have both
Yeah.
within us,
Yeah.
and we have to work with both. So it's not necessarily if I'm talking about. I was having this conversation with my husband just the other day. It's like it's not like it's just men versus female. It's like we each have that within us, and the more that we can embrace both sides of that and grow our capabilities on both sides of that. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. One of the guys I've gotten to know in some of this work, like through the LinkedIn community around men's research, is a guy named Daniel Fianduca, and he's in Europe. And he did an experiment. I can't remember if he started last year or a few years before, but he started, and he's a hetero cisgendered man who works in the corporate setting, but he started wearing nail polish.
Oh, that's awesome. There's
And
a guy on Instagram I follow that does this, and I love him.
I love it. I love it. And one of my boys wears nail polish. Like, he's doing it with a specific intention, which is like, what happens when I do this? And he's learned a
Hmm.
lot about himself around like grooming and stuff. But it also is helping him. And I think he's made this point around it brings me more into those dimensions of myself that are feminine. And it
Yeah.
got me thinking about what do I do that helps me tune into some of the parts of myself that are masculine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And some of those are stretch behaviors, but they matter.
Right.
They matter. So, whether that's finding my voice,
Hmm.
whether it's being brave in a hard conversation,
Yep.
whether it's using logic instead of emotion as a source
Hmm.
of data, like those are
Hmm.
things that I maybe don't do as well, but they matter to
Right.
how I show up in
Right.
that
So where do we
balance.
stretch ourselves in those spaces
Yeah.
that that really helps us grow there? That's funny because I think of, I often talk about soul and strategy in my work, and it's almost it's there's a bit of the masculine and the feminine in that soul and strategy, right? It's like, okay,
Yes.
which parts are you stepping into the strategy and which parts are you really listening to that inner wisdom? But we have to do both, right? We have to have both sides of that.
We do. And yet the social bias continues to encourage us to invest more heavily in the development of one set of skills than the other. And I
Hmm.
think in the world of the workplace, it continues to be strategy and it continues to be logic
Yeah.
and analysis. And
Right.
we continue to have sort of these atrophied muscles of the other skills that
Right.
create really high productivity, even though we know cognitively, we've read the
Yeah.
research, we know
Yeah.
what companies are doing
I
well.
remember a boss once saying to me that it doesn't matter what your intuition says. It's all about the facts. And I go back to that story all day long because it's like my intuition means something. There's something that's really relevant in, making pathways into something new and creative. And so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I love that. And I've come to think of intuition as facts that have been obscured. Like, and I'll tell you my favorite intuition story. So
Hmm.
I'll make it short. Many years ago, I was on a whitewater raft trip with family and friends, and we were on the Rogue River here in Oregon. And there's a particularly bad rapid there called the Picket Fence. And I ended up in a paddle boat or a paddle raft. It was self guided, so there were no guides. We were doing it on our own. Lots of experts on the trip, but I was in a paddle raft with 6 women, and we scouted this horrible rapid. And we went and looked at it ahead of time, and I couldn't see the line. For some reason, I just was having trouble. I'm not as fluent in whitewater as I am some other outdoor environments. And so I was a little anxious. And I said to my husband, I can't see the line. He said, there it is. It's right there. I'm like, I still don't see it. But I just stuffed my intuition. And I was like, that's okay. The people in the boat are experienced. I'm going to follow them. So got in the boat. Sure enough, Cami, we flipped that raft.
Mm.
And I was like a near death experience. I mean, I was underwater
Oh my
all the
gosh. Oh,
time.
that's scary.
It was scary. And I came up
Hmm.
looking for these other women. It was just horrible. We weren't, as a group, we weren't strong. Only 2 of us were really pretty strong. We just got ourselves in a bad situation as these things happen, and happen really quickly. And afterwards, as I've thought so often about what was probably one of the most scary accidents in my entire like outdoor going life, I realized that I tamped down and minimized my own intuition, which was about what I knew was true. What I knew was true from years of experience in the wilderness
Right.
was you have to know the line. You have to
Hmm.
be able to see it. And if you can't see it, you're not going to be able to paddle towards it. I
Right.
knew that from infinite pieces of data that were factually based, but I minimized it.
You were kind of going into that blind.
I was. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to just abdicate my own intuitive response for the group. And in hindsight, like since that time, I really listen to my intuition, and I don't listen to it as like, oh, this is woo woo, this is the feels. I listen to it as, wow, where's all this data coming from? And what is it informing? Because there's something about me that's below consciousness
Yeah.
that is telling me that I know the answer here,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then
So
it starts
interesting.
to be really powerful.
So a good lesson for us all to take into whether we're, looking at where our businesses are going, and it's like know that line.
Right.
So
Exactly. Pay attention to the
yeah.
internal data as
Yeah.
well as the
The
fact based.
external. Yeah. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. So where can people learn more about you and your company?
I would love to engage with people on LinkedIn. That's probably the platform I'm on the most, but also come to my website. We've got a host of free tools. And I'm really interested right now in supporting leaders, especially in small to mid sized companies who are trying to get kick ass results, but also want to do it by creating a workplace that brings out the best in people. So that's no easy feat,
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
know. So there's resources
Definitely.
on the website, which is momentum.com, with an E, the funny spelling with the E. And I'd love
Yeah.
to engage with any of your followers in that way. We publish a
Awesome.
twice weekly newsletter as well. People can sign up for.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
It's so good to know you. So, the final question I always close with is, what are 3 pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
so many, Cami. Well, I'm a big believer that sometimes the pearls of wisdom that are the most in front of us are the ones we most need. So you and I were
Hmm.
talking about this being the new year. So I guess some pearls of wisdom that are in front of me that I'm also striving for aspirationally are: one is the value of remembering my own enoughness.
Mm,
I think a
so good.
second,
That's for all of us. It's like such a good one. It's like,
so
why do we have to remember that so much? But it's like we do have to remember that.
well, we do. It's just like we're constantly battered by things in the world that allow us to tell ourselves the story that we're deficient.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm just really sitting with, hey, you actually have enough. You are enough. You do enough right now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I would say a second one that's surfacing for me right now is an old piece of wisdom that I got from sitting in the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous with my father in early recovery as a child, which was um, easy does it. Easy does it, which is really around, for me, it's around noticing when I'm hustling
Mm,
and trying to back off a little and ask myself questions like, does this require hustle?
yeah.
What would happen if you waited on this? Or like last night, it came up for me because I worked a long day and then I was meeting a friend for dinner, but I hadn't gotten any exercise and I had like an hour and a half. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I could totally work on that slide deck. But then I was like, no, easy does it. Like you actually would probably do better in the long run if you got on the Peloton.
That's such a I'm thinking of I have a dinner this evening and I've got space in between. So easy does it. I love
Do it.
it.
Easy does it. And you
I
know
could
what? I
work
think
on that PowerPoint deck or
but
easy
you know,
does it.
not like I went back to that deck this morning and it was easy. But if
Yeah.
I had done it last night, it would have probably taken me 90 minutes because I was tired, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so the third one, what is my third pearl of wisdom? Just show up. Just
Yeah.
show up. You know, that's something I do think of often. It's related to the first one around so often just being there
Yeah.
fully
Yeah.
is how we get what we want in life.
Yeah.
By just being there.
I love it. Mo, thank you so much. I adore you so much, and you're such a good
Oh,
friend. And thank you for sharing all your good wisdom and getting us all thinking today on a topic that I think we probably don't think about very often. So thank you so much.
well, thank you for having me and for being willing to engage. It's a different topic for sure, and
Yeah,
it takes all of us to create the kinds of workplaces and home lives that we really want. So thanks for inviting that invitation, Cami.
yeah.
Always a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to talk to you.
We'll talk soon, my friend.
All
Bye.
right, take care. Bye.